drugs making my friends crazy. I'm laying it down, don't bring it around, cause I ain't nothing but drug free. It's happening more and more each day. These drugs making my friends crazy. I'm laying it down, don't bring it around, cause I ain't nothing but drug free.
I used to see my buddy for years looking all depressed. I guess that he was in some major tests. After class, we used to go and play some ball. He was fast and tall and he surpassed us all. But after a while I seen him playing less and less. He be looking more depressed and stressed at best. So one day after class, I took him aside. I said, tell me what's going on, man, are you alright? He said, I got some issues with my folks I can't resolve. No need to stress you out, bro, or get you involved. So I put it to him, have you started smoking weed? And the answer that he gave me really made me grieve. He said, yeah, once in a while when I need to mellow out. But I'll be alright, I'm not the one to worry about. Yo, we gotta get you help before you ruin yourself. You got greatness ahead, you ain't like everyone else. He said, I promise I'll be fine, and he gave me his hand. So I trusted him and hoped that he would soon understand. A couple months went by and he'd be worse and worse, like he was thrown in a curse. I hope that he would reverse. And one day, he asked me for a couple of bucks. He says I need to pay a friend, and right now he's stuck. I said, I know you smoking crack now, I confirm that for a fact now. I gotta get your help now, don't even try to back down. Gave him the cash, he promised Monday he would meet me. Friday got the call that would defeat me completely. For years I died of drug overdose. That was the saddest day ever, ain't nothing comes close. Man, I hate those drugs, hate them with all my soul. Chokes the young and the old, till the bodies is cold. So I don't care if you a player or wanna be thug. Don't ever, ever come close to drugs.
Happening more and more each day. These drugs making my friends crazy. I'm laying it down, don't bring it around, cause I ain't nothing but drug free.
Months later, was still mourning his death. Was angry and sad that he fell in this mess. A teacher who noticed how miserable my soul was came over. He said, I see you carrying a boulder.
I know that I'm older, but let me tell you something that I never ever told you. Put my arms around his shoulder. My daughter, she was the pride of my heart as a father. We were never far apart. Was a popular girl, always on top of the world. Never scared to try something new and give it a whirl. But she had low self-esteem, if you know what I mean. And it only takes a moment, yo, to devastate a dream. She started hanging out with this girl from school. Her grades went down and she started breaking rules. And it festered and festered. We didn't want to face it till one day she came home totally wasted. Then a friend told us she was close to being arrested. We put our foot down and we forced to get her tested. She tested positive for drugs, but there was something else. The doctor asked to do more tests to check up on her health. And then came the news that will totally defeat me. Her use of all the needles, she had gotten HIV. I was livid. The moment and that feeling, I would always live with it. Man, it's still vivid. She died 5 years ago, nothing I could help. My Lord has helped me with this pain that I felt. With tears in my eyes, yo, I gave him a hug. May God give you strength to keep away from drugs. Keep away from drugs. Keep away from drugs.
Happening more and more each day. These drugs making my friends crazy. I'm laying it down, don't bring it around, cause I ain't nothing but drug free. It's happening more and more each day. These drugs making my friends crazy.
Can't you see? I'm drug free.
It's happening more and more each day. These drugs making my friends crazy. I'm laying it down, don't bring it around, cause I ain't nothing but drug free. It's happening more and more each day.
Keep away from drugs.
Making my friends crazy. I'm laying it down, don't bring it around, cause I ain't nothing but drug free. It's happening more and more each day. These drugs making my friends crazy. I'm laying it down, don't bring it around, cause I ain't nothing but drug free. It's happening more and more each day. These drugs making my friends crazy. I'm laying it down, don't bring it around, cause I ain't nothing but drug free.
Keep away from
It's happening more and more each day. These drugs making my friends crazy. I'm laying it down, don't bring it around, cause I ain't nothing but drug free. It's happening more and more each day.
Keep away from drugs.
Okay, I'm back. And Phillip Seymour Hoffman passed away. They say it was a heroin overdose. And I have a feeling that it was foul play. I've been around a lot of heroin addicts. I've known a lot who have died from it. But mostly they die from what's put in with the heroin, which is what Phillip Seymour Hoffman died from. He didn't die from the heroin, he died from what was in it. So I decided to do this little thing about heroin addiction. And I have a lot of clips here about Phillip Seymour Hoffman's death. And so I'm going to play those clips, and I'm going to talk about heroin addiction and other addictions. I know a lot of people who are crack addicts. I know a lot of people who are heroin addicts. And marijuana can be addictive too, but so can alcohol. I was a drunk. I don't consider myself an alcoholic because I didn't have a disease. I was drinking to escape a bad marriage. And then I decided, instead of escaping through alcohol, why don't I just get out? So I did. And I quit drinking. Well, I quit getting drunk. I didn't quit drinking. And not too long after that, I split up with my second wife, and I started to drink too much again. I was in the drug world. Tried marijuana, didn't like it. I guess I'm weird. But I quit drinking altogether. Since then, I've lived in a bar and I've tended bar and never had the urge to drink again. Anyway, alcohol addiction is a drug addiction. Alcohol is the worst drug addiction out there. It's the most dangerous drug out there. Except for cigarettes, nicotine addiction. That's what I have now. I'm a nicotine addict. And I gotta quit because I have emphysema now. And the strange thing is, though, that if you listen to some of my blog talk shows, you'll hear my heavy breathing. There's times when I'd have a track going and I still have my mic on and you could hear my breathing. My breathing was worse before then, and I didn't have emphysema then. Anyway, my breathing's worse now, but it's not as loud now. Anyway, I'm going to play these clips first, and I may talk in between some, and I may not. I don't know, because most of my editorials are on the cuff. But I got ABC, Phillip Seymour Hoffman's death sheds light on heroin addiction. David Pakman, arrest in Phillip Seymour Hoffman death. ENTV, Phillip Seymour Hoffman predicted his own death. RT, breaking the set. The Phillip Seymour Hoffman's death exposes the war on drugs. Brainwash update. The big picture, Phillip Seymour Hoffman didn't have to die. The Young Turks. Here's a real cause of Phillip Seymour Hoffman's death, says Wingnut. And Phillip Seymour Hoffman dead. Could legalization have saved him? Tom Hartman. Phillip Seymour Hoffman didn't have to die. You notice two of the titles are the same. Both of them were with Tom Hartman, but they are different. One was RT and the other one was his own show. So I'm going to start playing those. And like I say, I may speak up in between. I may not. I don't know yet. So here we go.
Heroin addiction in America, a stark number. The number of people using heroin here has doubled in 5 years. 700,000 people needing help tonight. And everyone who loved Phillip Seymour Hoffman is looking back at the recent pictures of him for clues, for the warning signs. Would you know if it was someone you loved? ABC's Cecilia Vega now with a very personal story reaching across so many lives.
It all seemed so normal. The last day of Phillip Seymour Hoffman's life. Coffee in his New York neighborhood, dinner with friends. But it would be his last because of the unrelenting pull from that demonic drug, heroin.
I did everything I could.
Those who've tried it say depression, anger, sadness, all gone in heroin's intense euphoria. Actor Russell Brand described it like this. It transforms a tight white fist into a gentle brown wave. The rush hits within seconds. After just 30 minutes, heroin can knock you out cold.
There's a tendency to be just kind of going to sleep in the middle of a sentence.
The high wears off after a few hours.
You can be a functioning heroin addict. We see it all the time.
To spot a hidden user, there are clues. Those heart-stopping 3 Ps of heroin. Paraphernalia. Look for spoons, needles, foil. Personality changes, like increased irritability, theft, and physical effects, track marks, small pupils. I know those signs.
My father was a heroin addict.
You see, this is where the story gets personal. I want to tell you about this man, my dad, Raul. Those good looks, that smile. He could have been whatever he wanted to be. Instead, he shot up.
He was a heroin addict before I was born. He was a heroin addict when I was a child, and ultimately it got the best of him.
I knew when he was high. I could see the track marks, too.
I think my father's drug addiction has really made me who I am today. You try to be everything that person couldn't be. He never got to see what became of me and my brother, and I think he would be really proud to see us now.
Phillip Seymour Hoffman, the new face of this formidable enemy, also leaving behind family, children, and friends to grieve heroin's suffocating grip.
And Cecilia is here now. I know it's tough to talk about something so close to your life.
Yeah, it was strange to see my father on TV, but you know what, Diane, I'm really glad to share this story because I know that it's so many families just like mine out there, supportive, loving families that learn to live and cope with addiction in our lives.
No barriers, and on the increase, these numbers?
You know, you mentioned the number of heroin users. The number of heroin-related deaths are up to 27,000 people killed because of heroin over the last 10 years. And it's not just that. The power of this drug, we said it in the story, is gripping. You can try it, doctors tell us, and 2 weeks later can become hooked after that first time using it.
Well, thank you again, Cecilia, for this really important report.
Okay, on heroin, too. The problem with the drug war is that it makes the drugs worse. I know a lot of people on heroin, and a lot of them have died. That number that she gave you over a 10-year period isn't anywhere near the people that die from alcohol or cigarettes. The most dangerous drugs out there are legal. And heroin is a horrible drug. since it's illegal, you don't know what you're getting with it. Like the drug that killed Phillip Seymour Hoffman was mixed with another drug that is much more dangerous. And that's what killed him. I just have a feeling, though, that he was murdered because of the way he was found. Seems like whenever you find a dead person with the needle still in them, it's usually because they were murdered. But I'll talk more about what happens to people on heroin, like I say, because of the drug war. I don't want anybody to think heroin's a good drug. It's a bad drug. It's one of the worst out there, one of the most addictive. But you could lower the number of addicts by legalizing it and controlling it. It's been proven, and other places that did it. And Portugal, drug use has gone down since it was decriminalized. Anyway, I'm going to get back to the tracks.
Phillip Seymour Hoffman, the great Academy Award-winning actor, died over the weekend after a drug overdose. He was actually found with a needle in his arm. We didn't talk much about his death. Certainly Phillip Seymour Hoffman in some absolutely excellent movies. I would venture to say one of the greatest American actors of his generation, certainly. I don't think that's an exaggeration. I was interested to read today in the Huffington Post and on CNN that after his death was ruled an apparent drug overdose, police started investigating, well, where did the drugs come from? What are the details of this particular overdose? And now police have made multiple arrests in connection with an investigation that stemmed from the death of actor Phillip Seymour Hoffman. According to Lieutenant John Grimple of NYPD, officers executed a search warrant at an apartment building on the 300 block of Mott Street in Lower Manhattan, not very far from our studio, in fact, recovered a quantity of narcotics and made 4 arrests. The New York Times reported that police searched 3 apartments, arrested 3 men and 1 woman, and found 350 bags of heroin. The identities of the suspects have not been released. Initially, a tip led police to the apartment building, and the TMZ is reporting that the tip came from a heroin user who says that he had the same drug dealer as Phillip Seymour Hoffman. Okay, so why is this interesting to me? This is interesting to me because immediately I ask myself, does the average overdose death in New York City lead to this level of an investigation? And the answer is absolutely not. It will make little difference to the suppliers of these drugs that some neighborhood drug dealer was busted. Essentially, this investigation will have almost no effect on the so-called war on drugs. This is simply, whoever was arrested is merely a cog in the black market, well-oiled machine of the drug trade. And it is yet more evidence of the kind of disproportionate, arbitrary, and capricious nature of the war on drugs, and how disproportionately those who have money and typically are not minorities have, even in death, their overdose, their involvement with the drug trade leads to such different activity than when, I don't know, some black kid in the Bronx is found in an alley as opposed to an expensive Lower Manhattan apartment, dead of an apparent drug overdose. It only highlights to me the incredible inequality that exists with the war on drugs.
Right. And just overall, I mean, I can't believe that's the discussion that people think we should be having. Where the drugs came from is completely moot. It's just
Well, it's moot. I want to clarify. The specific local dealer where the drugs came from is moot, given that the entire system funds and supports where they really come from, which is typically from other countries and people making a ton of money.
Right. This specific small instance in which some small-time, of course, drug dealer handed this stuff to Phillip Seymour Hoffman. But at the same time, he was said to have bought about $1,000 worth of drugs. Your average person on the street is not going to be spending that kind of money. So they probably thought that, well, perhaps because this is at such a high level and there's so much money here in these transactions, maybe this could lead to something big.
I understand what you're saying, but in the grand scheme of things, in New York City, $1,000 heroin buy is not really that much. Yeah, it's probably more than the $50 that many people are buying in Lower Manhattan from this same dealer, but we're not talking about a necessarily huge bust. I mean, $1,000, it's $1,000, and to Phillip Seymour Hoffman, it's not that much. But it is very, very interesting, and we're actually tomorrow we'll be talking to Professor Ernest Drucker about the war on drugs and incarceration and so many of the issues that go along with this. Let's take a break. DavidPakman.com, the blue banner at the top of the page that takes you to our...
Okay, I want to say another thing about that, too. This heroin that he had was laced with a poison. It was a drug used for cancer patients is like a super painkiller, and it's deadly. And in Detroit, a friend of mine died from it, and it was a horrible death. So I do believe because of they were laced with, the cops were right and going after this dealer, because dealers that sell that kind of stuff, they're killers, they're murderers. Okay, back to
Do the Red Hot Chili Peppers have a deep, dark secret? Phillip Seymour Hoffman, did he really predict his own death? And Bethany Frankel, what she's scared of. Hey guys, it's Chloe here with all the juicy bits the entertainment world is buzzing about today. There has been a major backlash against the Red Hot Chili Peppers, who performed with Bruno Mars and the Hooligans during the halftime Super Bowl performance. And this is what's going on. Everybody is claiming that since Flea's bass guitar was not plugged in during the performance, that means that he wasn't performing live. And now everyone is questioning whether or not the whole band actually played live, or were they singing along to a track? Was it all fake? Was it lip syncing? Well, now Flea has actually taken to Twitter to admit that he had no choice but to have his guitar unplugged and to fake his entire guitar jam sessions on stage. But you know what though? They had a lot to cram into just a few minutes of a performance in front of millions of people there in the stadium and at home. So can you really blame them? So an eerie report on TMZ claims that Phillip Seymour Hoffman actually sort of predicted his own death. All right, so here's what they have to say. So the actor was actually on a 6-week heroin binge before he passed away. So now TMZ is reporting that during an AA meeting, he was asked just how bad is his addiction, to which he responded, "I'm going to die if I don't get off these drugs." Now, another report in the Daily Mail is claiming that when Phillip was approached at the Sundance Film Festival by someone who didn't know who he was and casually said, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" to which he responded allegedly, "I'm a heroin addict." This all comes as a complete shock, and he leaves behind a longtime partner named Mimi and 3 children. So this is really sad. Bethany Frankel, former Real Housewives of New York star, is reportedly freaking out that during her custody battle with Jason Hoppy, that many deep, dark secrets of hers are going to be revealed, which will make her lose fans and possibly even her talk show.
Over the weekend, the world lost one of the greatest actors of our time. Phillip Seymour Hoffman died at the tragically young age of 46 from an apparent heroin overdose. Hoffman was a brilliant talent who was able to transform himself into any character on screen, but usually picked the darkest and deepest roles. According to reports, he was found with a syringe still in his arm with at least 50 bags of heroin inside of his apartment, along with a host of prescription medication. His death comes on the heels of an outbreak of a particularly dangerous strain of heroin laced with a prescription-grade fentanyl that has so far caused nearly 100 deaths over the last year. But Hoffman's death is not unique by any means. Ben Levison, founder of the Origins Recovery Center, told CBS News, quote, "For every celebrity that overdoses, there are 75 to 100 addicts that die. And for every celebrity with an addiction problem, there are millions more that suffer in silence." In fact, the majority of deaths in the U.S. are from drug overdoses, which is a wonder considering how much else can kill you. According to the Centers for Disease Control, drug overdosers were responsible for 105 deaths per day in 2010, which doesn't even take into account the near 7,000 people that are treated daily for abusing drugs. According to the Daily Beast, 75% of America's 38,000 yearly drug overdoses are opioid-related. But would we have had the same reaction to Hoffman's death if he was found dead from a pill overdose instead of with a needle in his arm? Considering how one is a legal form of heroin and the other is illegal, it's certainly more culturally acceptable and confusing when celebrities die from something less taboo. So how does such a brilliant person who knows the risks still pick up the needle? Well, Hoffman's death exemplifies how difficult the struggle is for a lifetime addict. Someone who can successfully kick drugs for over 2 decades only to relapse and die. Addiction is a powerful and uncurable disease, and the only way to beat addiction is to manage it. The U.S. is only one of 2 countries in the world that has direct-to-consumer advertising of prescription pills, and also has the most medicated population on Earth. Obviously, there's a huge problem here. But aside from the obvious need to overhaul education and rehabilitation programs to incorporate more preventative methodology, there are some things that can be done right now to help struggling addicts take drugs more responsibly. Big Pharma isn't going away anytime soon. So in order to combat this epidemic head-on, we need more information about the dangers of chemical cocktails, of uppers and downers, and it needs to be much more difficult to get medical access to high-grade opioids. As far as street drugs, we need labs that can freely test them without penalty nor questions asked, so users know exactly what it is they're taking and how much to take safely, especially since there's no legal recourse on the user's side. Just weeks ago, the Supreme Court ruled that drug dealers are not responsible for overdoses, which I'm sure applies to people knowingly selling death doses of fentanyl-laced heroin. Since this country is fighting a war on drugs that costs billions of dollars annually and wastes millions of lives in prison or worse, the first thing that should be done is stopping the flow of opium from the very country the U.S. is occupying. Over 90% of the world's heroin comes from Afghanistan. So it shouldn't be that hard to oversee the export route and try to eradicate the crop. On that note, the entire war on drugs needs to end immediately and all drugs decriminalized. But someone's making a lot of money from this war and the opium flow. So I guess the responsibility is left for you and me. There is a light on the horizon, though. Through ballot initiatives and pressure on local governments to take action. Recently, Good Samaritan measures have been passed in both Vermont and New Jersey, which offer legal protection to anyone seeking medical help for themselves or others in the event of an overdose. Also, there needs to be nationwide access to naloxone, an overdose antidote for opioids. According to the Huffington Post, quote, studies have shown that this drug can cut overdose death rates, by 50%. Yet only 11 states have enacted laws giving legal protection to those who can administer the drug. So although drug abuse has been stigmatized and silenced in this country for decades, it's very real. And the dialogue needs to be open so others can seek help, seek treatment, and most importantly, stay alive.
Okay, I do not agree with addiction being incurable. What you need to do is have a program that works. Right now, most of your drug rehab centers have drug dealers working for them. And it's just as easy to get your drugs in a drug rehab center as it is in a prison or in the street. Prison is about the easiest place to get drugs. But what it is, it's, you know, AA and NA say it's a disease, but I don't go along with that. The way to get off the drugs is to find out the reason the person is on the drugs. And getting them to deal with that reason. My reason for being a drunk was simply the fact that I was in an unhappy marriage. And back then, and this was over 30 years ago, and the way, you know, I was escaping, and like I said before, and it's better just to get the hell out. So what we have to do is work on the cause. You can't force a person to go to rehab. You can't force them to get off of drugs. They have to do it on their own. But you can help them find what the cause is and help them deal with the cause. Anyway, back to the tracks.
Today, movie fans and film aficionados all over the world are mourning the death of one of the greatest actors of all time, Phillip Seymour Hoffman. Known for such films as Boogie Nights, Capote, The Master, and most recently The Hunger Games, Hoffman had a reputation as an actor's actor, the type of guy both casual moviegoers and artists respect. He was a true actor, not just a performer, and was capable of playing a wide range of characters. He was found dead in his New York City apartment at around 11 o'clock Sunday morning, just blocks away from where his kids were playing at a playground. Police found a syringe and bags of heroin at the scene, so all signs point to a heroin overdose as the cause of death. Details are still emerging, but it appears that the heroin found in Hoffman's apartment belongs to a nasty strain of laced heroin, known by such names as Ace of Spades and Theraflu. Hoffman was only 46 years old, a master of his craft and the father of 3 young children. It is truly a tragedy that someone with so much talent and so much to live for died so young. But perhaps the most tragic thing of all is that Hoffman's death could very easily have been prevented. It could have been prevented if we in the United States started to do what countries like the United Kingdom and Switzerland have been doing for years, and that is prescribing heroin to heroin addicts. I know this sounds counterintuitive, but it actually makes perfect sense once you understand how heroin works. Opiate drugs like heroin are highly addictive, but actually abuse of alcohol and tobacco causes more serious damage to the body. Heroin doesn't ravage the liver, doesn't cause lung cancer. While heroin addiction does have some negative long-term effects, the real health dangers of heroin abuse are addiction, overdose, and disease. Heroin overdose happens for 2 main reasons. 1, the user is inexperienced or careless and uses too much heroin accidentally. Or 2, the user has become so addicted that they start using more heroin and more potent strains of heroin to get a stronger high. That could be what caused Phillip Seymour Hoffman's overdose. The other major risks of heroin addiction actually have nothing to do with the drug itself. Where the drug is illegal, addicts don't usually have access to clean needles, and so many of them end up sharing needles, dirty needles, with other users in the addict community. And as a result, many addicts end up contracting HIV or other blood-borne diseases like hepatitis C. As long as they use heroin, drug addicts run the risk of either overdosing or contracting deadly diseases. By criminalizing addiction, like we have done here in the United States, we've actually increased both of these risks, and we have and we have also increased the cost to all of society, you and me included, by the behavior of this very small percentage of Americans who are heroin addicts. Instead of punishing addicts or scaring them away from public view, we need to treat their condition like a public health problem. This is exactly what countries like Great Britain, Switzerland, and until November, Canada have done with their heroin prescription programs. Once an addict gets a prescription for legal heroin, he has access to safe, clean needles and the purest forms of heroin possible. The addict also has access to anti-addiction programs to help him wean himself off heroin while getting the dosage he needs to avoid painful withdrawal symptoms. Critics say that prescribing heroin endorses heroin addiction, but the facts don't lie. Heroin prescription programs work. After the Swiss legalized prescription programs in the mid-1990s, they saw an immediate drop in both drug-related deaths and deaths due to AIDS among drug addicts. More recent studies have reached the same conclusion. A paper published by the New England Journal of Medicine in 2009 looked at a set of experimental prescription programs in Canada and found that they led to a significant reduction of crime and overdose deaths. Similar new research put out in 2012 by the European Monitoring Center for Drugs and Drug Addiction found that the benefits of prescription heroin included a major reduction in the extent of continued injection of street heroin, improvements in general health, psychological well-being, and social functioning, as well as major disengagement from criminal activities such as acquisitive crime to fund continued use of street heroin and other street drugs. The study also found that heroin prescription programs saved more lives than traditional addiction treatment programs that use a drug known as methadone as a replacement for heroin. By the way, many people suggest that methadone, a synthetic drug, is actually more addictive and destructive than heroin, which is derived from opium poppies. But studies only tell half the story. For heroin addicts themselves, prescription programs are a chance to tackle their problems head-on without having to worry about going to jail and without having to steal to pay for a fix. Here's what former addict Dave Murray told the Canadian Broadcasting Company about his experience with an experimental prescription program in Vancouver.
Not all that long ago, Dave Murray would shoot up heroin in Vancouver's filthy alleys. He credits his turnaround with a pilot project where he was prescribed heroin by a doctor instead of buying it off the street.
It was definitely effective. It stopped me. It took a lot of the stress that was in my life, stress of every day having to find that drug.
Ultimately, heroin addiction is a public health problem. And if we're truly interested in doing something about it, we need to start treating it like a public health problem. This means to consider solutions like heroin prescription programs, even though they may seem counterintuitive or politically difficult. In the end, fighting heroin addiction and drug addiction in general, for that matter, should be dealt with in the most practical fashion possible, and a medical fashion. That's why the United States should start its own heroin prescription program as soon as possible. As long as heroin is not available by prescription, the public is at risk and people's lives are at stake. After all, if heroin were already available by prescription, there's a very good chance people like Phillip Seymour Hoffman would still be with us.
Phillip Seymour Hoffman was found dead in his Manhattan apartment. Screenwriter David Katz found him with a syringe in his arm. At this moment, there are allegations that he died from a drug overdose. However, we have to wait for the real results of certain tests to come out to confirm that. However, even though he had that syringe in his arm and an envelope of heroin, apparently he had gone through drug rehab when he was in his 20s, and he had been clean for at least 23 years, and of course he relapsed. Now this is obviously very sad news, and it's unexpected. No one would have guessed that this would happen, and I just don't, the only thing that I can really say about this is I just don't understand what leads anyone to do drugs like this, but it happens, and that's why it's important to legalize and regulate, because in that case, I mean, you have places like Canada, right, that have places where you can go and you can inject yourself with the drugs. At least it's being monitored, right?
So you don't die.
And you don't die. And at least you know it's not laced with something that's even more harmful. There are a number of deaths that have occurred because of dirty or bad heroin, and it's been laced with a drug that's given to terminally ill cancer patients. It's supposed to be a pain medication 100 times more powerful than morphine. We don't know if that was the case in this situation, but again, you got to legalize and regulate so stuff like this doesn't happen as often.
So people will take this as an example of why not to legalize. I mean, heroin is so dangerous. Are you guys crazy that you're going to legalize? Mm-hmm. No, but if you took it in a controlled environment, well, there's officials there. They're not going to let you die, right? So I think Anna's 100% right about it. Look, Phillip Seymour Hoffman was a great actor. And to your first question, Anna, of course, we never know, but it's interesting. You know, you think that if you achieve certain levels of success, whether it's financial or it's fame or whatever it might be, power, that you're going to be happy. But that's not really how life works. Sometimes there's a hole in somebody's, you know, I don't want to say heart, that's hokey and I don't even believe that, but something that they're yearning to fill up, that they just can't, no matter what they do, no matter how successful they are, they can't satisfy that. Yeah. And sometimes that's the reason they turn to drugs. Now, of course, we don't know Phillip Seymour Hoffman in particular, right, and what his situation was, but obviously he was an incredibly successful, really well-liked actor, and, you know, won an Oscar, etc., and but yet he felt like he needed something more, which is a damn shame because he didn't. He could have found, I mean, it's easy to say afterwards, right? But he could have found that happiness in so many other ways.
Yeah, I think, you know, you never know what kind of inner demons people are living with or dealing with. And in the case of celebrities, since we see them on the big screen, since we see them out in public, we act as if we know who they are or what they're going through. Obviously, we have no idea. But my favorite quote, as hokey as it may sound, is, you know, if you want to feel rich, count the things in your life that you can't buy with money. Right? Mm-hmm. Because there is this misconception, especially in our culture, that the more wealthy you are, the more financially successful you are, the happier you'll be. But that's not necessarily the case. I mean, we've done many stories of actors that have died as a result of a drug overdose. And, you know, my heart goes out to him and his, you know, to his family, you know. He's
got 3 young kids.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yes, by the way, that was hokey.
But it's true.
Yeah, and if you think fame is the answer, boy, you're barking up the wrong tree. Because as Anna pointed out, it's not just actors too; it's also musicians, countless. They get famous, and it appears, obviously, we don't know all the statistics behind it, but they're more likely to die of a drug overdose, not less likely. Now, there's many other factors, and I'm sure that there are plenty of famous people who are super happy, but that's obviously not the sole answer. And we're all going to miss him. I loved him as an actor, and if he was in a movie, I was more likely to see it because I knew it was going to be a little bit more powerful. And so it's a damn shame.
Actor Phillip Seymour Hoffman might have died from a drug overdose, but Ben Shapiro, who's the editor-at-large at Breitbart, says that it's actually our broken leftist culture that led to his death. Yeah. On the National Review, he wrote a piece where he talked about how liberals lead to this culture of immorality, and as a result, people do things that they shouldn't do. For example, he says libertarianism becomes libertinism without a cultural force pushing back against the penchant for sin. That's the real issue here, the penchant for sin. He continues, no one knows what sort of demons plague Seymour Hoffman. Without a sound moral structure around those in Hollywood who have every financial and talent advantage, the path to destruction is far too easy.
The dirty stuff Ben Shapiro must be doing at home. Okay. Oh, you have to have moral strictures, otherwise you will sin, sin, sin. I wonder what's going through your head, Ben, right? Look, this has nothing to do with Hollywood sins or whatever. Look, it's just this guy, apparently, obviously when he was younger, Phillip Seymour Hoffman was addicted. He relapsed at this point. They say that he was clean for 23 years. Who knows how much of that is true. And if you have an addiction, it does. You can go and thump him with the Bible or the Talmud all that you want. Okay, that doesn't really help the situation. You have to actually get him clinical help so that he can beat that addiction. Your idiotic moralizing doesn't help the situation at all. Like, we're in the media, we're not doing heroin because we're like, oh my, and we're even worse, we're agnostics. We're not like, hey, Anna, you know what?
Yeah.
I just realized there's no moral constraints. Let's go crazy. Yeah. Let's do heroin.
Yeah, so 2 points about this. First of all, I think it's disgusting that he's using this actor's death to make a false connection between liberals and overdoses, right? Like, politicizing this is so unbelievably ridiculous, right? But other than that, I hate people who make the argument that you need religion to be moral, that religion is necessary for morality, right? Like, I'm not religious, and I think I'm perfectly moral. And I treat people with respect, I treat my body with respect, and that's all that matters, right? As long as you're not going out of your way of hurting others, it's fine. It's just so stupid that people make that argument.
There's nothing that scares me more than people who think, well, if it wasn't for God, I would do terrible things. Right? Mm-hmm. Like, we don't have God. We don't do terrible things. You know why? Because we don't want to hurt other people.
Exactly.
And we don't want to hurt ourselves, right? But apparently, the so-called religious people who claim to be so moral, they think, well, if I didn't have God to spank me in the afterlife, well, then I would do all the fucked up shit that's in my head, right? So, Ben, what's in your head? Never mind. I don't want to know.
Yeah.
Okay. The other one I was going to do with Tom Hartman was about the same as what he did in the big picture, so I'm skipping that. Okay, I want to say a few things. First of all, one thing mentioned was that 90% of the heroin comes from Pakistan. Now, before the U.S. got in there, that wasn't true, because Taliban had gotten rid of the heroin trade in Pakistan. But one reason why the drug war continues is the CIA sells drugs. And the CIA makes their money that they can't get from Congress to do their shit by selling the drugs. They're the ones responsible for crack. And so, and you remember the Iran-Contra, that was a drug deal too. So, the United States makes money off of drugs, off the drug war. And a lot of other people make money off of it, like the people that sell the weapons involved and everything. They want to keep it going. The thing is that when we had prohibition on alcohol, as soon as they got rid of prohibition, deaths went down from shootouts, and the illegal trade was gone pretty much, except for moonshine. And but alcohol is still a big problem, just like the other drugs. Like I said, the worst drugs out there are the legal drugs. Now, I've seen a lot of deaths from heroin. I've seen deaths from crack cocaine. I haven't seen any from marijuana. They say marijuana doesn't lead to other drugs, but I don't know of a crack addict that didn't start with marijuana. But still, marijuana is better than alcohol. And marijuana can cure a lot of things that are wrong and can get rid of pain and can help with what is that called? The syndrome thing. PTSD, whatever. So, anyway, let me tell you a few things. I had a girlfriend. Her son he thought of me as another father. She was a crack addict. And before he quits high school, we were sitting on the front porch, and he was crying. He was about 14 or 15 then. He didn't make it through ninth grade, and ended up quitting and ended up selling drugs. He didn't use crack, he did smoke marijuana. And he was shot at in a drive-by. I was there when that one happened. And he was shot with a shotgun. But it was buckshot or birdshot. And just very painful. They weren't trying to kill him. They were trying to send him a message. And after he quit at selling the drugs, he was shot in a drive-by with a .357 Magnum, was shot 9 times. He survived. But he's going to feel it for the rest of his life. The big problem, you got a lot of kids out there selling drugs. And that sort of cuts down their lifespan. There was a 12-year-old kid, kicked his parents out of the house and started selling drugs out of the house. A couple months later, he was murdered. A drug hit. I guess he tried to do to the dealer what he did to his parents. But the biggest problem with the drugs is a drug war. I mentioned a friend of mine who died a horrible death from heroin that was laced with the same stuff that Phillip Seymour Hoffman had. And he ended up going to the hospital. He was on life support for a while. And people were saying that the daughter should have him taken off, but she wouldn't do it. Which ended up, he came to, but they sent him home. He ended up back in the hospital the same day. He ended up losing his toes and went back into a coma and never came out of it. And I would be willing to bet that 90% of the drug deaths are because of the war on drugs. You don't know what's in those drugs. I know of a couple, and their son was a straight-A student in high school. Tried marijuana, but it was laced with something. He ended up going crazy. Tried to commit suicide. His grades went down. He ended up quitting school. Tried to jump in front of a train, but a cop was there and jumped and pushed him out of the way. And the cop survived too. Then he was working for a drug dealer. And he was cleaning the bathroom. And a gal went to the dealer and said if he gave her crack, she would give him sex. The dealer said no, so she went into the bathroom where he was and did the same thing with him, and he shot and killed her. Something that would not have happened if drugs were legal. Then I do know deaths that another guy I know on heroin. I mean, when I met him, his hands were huge because he was shooting up in his hands. And he got off of it. And about 3 years after he got off with it, I saw him again. And I didn't recognize him, but he recognized me. Told me he got off of it 3 years before, got his family back, was doing good. 2 weeks later, he had a heart attack and died. I know of a gal that was on crack. She met a guy and she got off the crack and was living with him, but then they split up and she got back on the crack. Her heart exploded. Another gal on crack. She had twins, and they were 2 months old, and she died of a heart attack. She was only 22 years old. Again, because of the crack. But the deaths from crack, from heroin, aren't as many as the ones from alcohol. And then those drugs that psychiatrists give you, 70% of the suicides are caused by those drugs. And about 70% of the mass murders are caused by those drugs. Psychiatrists and drug companies are guilty of murder, plain and simple. And there's times when I'll do a whole night full of things on psychiatric drugs. I wrote a book called The Crazy Old White Man from the Hood. It's about my experiences through life, really, but a big part of it was my experiences in the hood. And you can get it at archive.org for free. Download it, or you can read it there. If you go to my profile, Spreaker profile, you'll find it, the link to it. Or if you go to archive.org and put in either Lee Gaylord or Crazy Old White Man from the Hood or Crazy Old Man Network, one word, you can get to it. Anyway, I just want everybody to know that we need to get rid of this drug war. Most of my friends that have died because of the drug war. And we can use the money for getting people off of drugs. Like they mentioned, with the heroin. Use the heroin to get rid of the heroin addiction. And it'd be a lot safer if they get it on a prescription basis where they would use clean needles and you'd be sure of the quality of the heroin. It wouldn't be an overdose factor. You get just enough to shoot up with, and eventually you can get off of it. And another thing we need is to have ex-addicts and ex-cons go into schools in 5th grade and tell the kids their stories. And I think that'll keep the kids from going to it. Anyway, it's time for me to close it. I want to thank you all for listening. And before I close it, though, I'm going to play about 14 minutes. Day in the Death of Donnie B, which is a soundtrack for a short black and white movie about Donnie B, a heroin addict. It was done, I believe, in the 50s, maybe 60s, before they had color. And I've known people like him. Another thing I wanted to say, too, is that I see a lot of people going around with one leg. In fact, one of them couldn't even afford crutches. He'd hop on one leg, go to the place where he'd be begging, and he'd sit down on the ground or on the sidewalk and beg. Since they lost their limbs to drug addiction, they didn't get help. Anyway, I'm going to play Donnie B before I sign off.
It's a day in the death of Donnie B. Strung out, waiting to die. Nothing to laugh at, no one to cry. Just another dirty gray day in the death of Donnie B. Just another dirty gray day in the death of Donnie B.
Drugs is just a waste of time.
Just to be normal, you have to go to a lot of hell.
It's like suicide, jumping off a bridge.
I know he's killing himself, and I have a sneaky suspicion that he knows it also.
This is one of the places where you usually find a junkie. This cold, narrow, steel barred cell. You'll see him in here, double up in pain, sweating it out, waiting for tomorrow.
I really didn't know who I was, what I was or where I was going.
He is socially dead, morally dead, and soon he will be physically dead.
Drugs are a cop-out. It really doesn't help the matter any. Makes it worse.
You're a poor person. Here you have a very expensive habit. In fact, you're really living like a rich person, because here you're giving yourself something which is going to cost you quite a few dollars per day. And where's the money going to come from? No one's going to give you that much money a day. And as your habit grows, in other words, as you use more and more drugs, this is inevitable. It's going to happen that you need more and more money. And no one's going to give you that as a gift. No one is going to be sorry for you and give you money just to be giving you money, but because you look sick, because your habit is coming down on you. You're going to have to get the money somehow, so you're going to steal.
There's no future for him. As it stands in reality, there is no present because he's really non-existent. His whole world consists of, let's say, of him. The economic crisis consists mainly of the hassle of trying to get that dollar. Stealing, lying, cheating their friends. They like to use people for what they can get. They might as well be dead.
My husband has been around this problem quite some time, and when it hit our family, at first, it sounds so cruel for my husband to say, well, I guess I better go out and get some more insurance out on him, because since he doesn't give a damn about his own life, at least we can make some money from it. And I thought this was very cruel to have my husband say something like this. But then when you sit down and think about it realistically, this is exactly what he's doing.
What has to happen, the addict has to change his present view that he has of himself. If he doesn't, he will remain a walking corpse. And until this thing happens, he will continue on this path to nowhere.
It's a day in the death of Donnie B. Can't see a blue sky above. Can't feel the raindrops. Can't feel the sun. Can't know a lover. Couldn't have one. Can't feel the snowflakes. Can't work or play. Too busy finding a fix for the day. Just another weary, worried day in the death of Donnie B. Just another weary, worried day in the death of Donnie B.
When you come into court, you see these people standing before the law, you can realize, gee, I remember seeing that person walking around, the neighborhood, a few months ago. And they must have seen all the addicts, they must have seen the people hanging on the streets, and people that were without clothes and shelter because they used drugs. But that didn't seem to impress their minds. They probably were saying to themselves, well, that will never happen to me. I'm starting to use drugs, but I know I won't be like that. I'm not that old, I'm young, and I can take care of it, I can control my habit and all this kind of thing,
Most of the people we do arrest are the minor people, the street addict, the 18, 19-year-old person with his own junk, use 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 bags a day. Arrest them for either possessing narcotics itself or for committing various crimes they need to do in order to get the money to supply their habit. And he spends anywhere from 6 months to 2, 3, 4 years in jail on each offense.
It's kind of hard to see a young person almost near death because he stuck a needle in his arm. A person who's vital, who has a lot of life in him, who should be going to school and who should be playing, playing basketball or something, yet and has a body to be able to do these things. This happens time after time. Seeing even teenagers almost dying, fighting death. Many people stand around in the crowd, and watching this person if they see this kind of thing, and there's not too much sympathy for it. This is a different kind of death.
He's sleepy, his nose is running, he itches. He feels cold, he feels hot. He doesn't even know what the sun really looks like. He's literally living in a world of illusion. He's like a zombie.
It's a way of living for Donnie B. Driving his friends for a buck. And nothing else matters. Nobody cares. Hanging around to raise a little bread for the death of Donnie B. Hanging around to raise a little bread for the death of Donnie B.
The great bulk of the junkies are still in the same place I left them at. 25 years ago, I was in the streets, a detective making an arrest, and today I see the same fellas who've been to jail off and on, on the same corners, in the same stinking cellars, in the same rooftops, and their friends have died of overdoses or just being sick from the junk. And they're still in the same spot. Nothing has changed for them. But most of them I've known 20 years ago are dead or in jail.
I found better things to do. I saw that wasn't me. I wanted to live to be an old man, real old man. It's hard to describe. It's just really a way of killing yourself.
No more school, no more future. It's an abysmal end. And I tell you, I'm not trying to put any kids down or any people down, but start with junk. It puts you down.
It's the needle and vein for Donnie B. Freezing his muscle and brain. Bottle cap living, bottle cap dead. Just another dirty gray dawn in the death of Donnie B. Just another dirty gray dawn in the death of Donnie B.
So it's a pretty rough story. There's no easy way to tell a guy, don't take it because you get jaundice, because you get syphilis, because you die. No, he doesn't want to listen. This guy knows everything about dope. The only thing he doesn't know that when I see them in the autopsy room on a Monday morning, you see this fish-eyed look looking up at the ceiling. It's the end of the road. And then you got to call the old lady in, his mother, and tell her to pick up the brown paper bag up front and take all his clothes. That's the end of the road for her boy. And then she says, why? Why?
Goodbye, Donnie. You're feeling no pain. Messing up your life with that needle and vein. Just another dirty gray dawn in the death of Donnie B. Just another dirty gray dawn in the death of Donnie B. Say goodbye to the people, Donnie. You're going away soon. Goodbye, Donnie. Goodbye, Donnie. Goodbye, Donnie. Goodbye, Donnie. Goodbye, Donnie.
Okay, I am going to close the show now. I'll see you tomorrow morning or around noon maybe with the news. And so I want you all to have a good day, good week, good month, and a good year. Most of all, a beautiful life. Thank you for being you, and TGYA, thank God you're alive.